Morning, everybody. Welcome to our discussion today that is part of the Hygiene Bank's series of thought leadership debates during what is our first National Hygiene Week. A very, very significant moment for the charity, and I'm delighted to be joined this morning by a very wide-ranging group of people whose organisations make a real impact at times like this. We have people on this panel today who are in the charity sector looking at food poverty, hygiene poverty, debt management, domestic violence, well-being, skill development, employability, and more. The Hygiene Bank have been very privileged to work with over its last two operating periods. We wanted to bring the group together today who are a group of strategic thinkers to help raise awareness of how we can work together to solve poverty in the UK. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel members. We have James Persad, who is the Head of Marketing and Communications from FareShare. We have Charlotte Walshe with us, who is the Head of Charity Partnerships from In-Kind Direct. We have Louise Richmond, who is the Director of Development for the Mayor's Fund for London. And we also have Jo Bridger, who's the Procurement Officer for Women's Aid. And I'd like to hand over to each of my colleagues on the debate today to introduce themselves and the work that they do. So James, can I ask you please to come in at this point?
Sure, thank you, Elaine. And thank you to everybody, all my fellow panellists. So I'm James Persad, Head of Marketing and Comms at FareShare. FareShare are the UK's largest surplus food redistribution charity. We have a network of 11,000 charities that we support with fresh food that we obtain from the food industry, and through a network of warehouses and vans and an army of volunteers, we redistribute that food day in, day out to as many of those charities that we can support. Prior to COVID-19, we were providing enough meals to support about 1 million people a week. And during the height of lockdown, we increased that to over 3.4 million meals per week. And we saw the need ramp up massively. We were able to do that with the support of our incredible food partners. We also received some very kind and large donations of food from partners, including Tesco and Co-op. And we received some funding from government to make a food purchase to help support the food volumes that we were being demanded of us by our charity partners. So really delighted to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And I'll move on now to Charlotte Walshe, please, from In-Kind Direct.
Hi, thanks, Elaine. So I'm Head of Charity Partnerships with In-Kind Direct, so I look after our network of charities. In-Kind Direct is the UK charity that redistributes consumer goods from manufacturers and retailers out to a network of about 5,000 charities working across the UK. So that's everything from community groups, food banks, schools, through to registered charities. And that's consumer goods for us is everything. It's everything we class as a life essential. So it's toilet roll, hand wash, through to clothes, toys, bedding, office supplies, anything that A, helps the charities we're working with to do more for less, and B, helps the communities they're working with to get what they need. So during COVID, as you can imagine, demand for what we do has been even higher than usual. We've had about 3 times the demand during the crisis period. Sort of from March to August, we've worked with just over 2,500 charities to distribute almost £12 million worth of goods. And we can't see that need going anywhere anytime soon.
Thank you, Charlotte. If I could hand over to introduce Louise Richmond, please.
Hello, my name's Louise. I'm Director of Development at the Mayor's Fund for London. We are a pan-London youth charity championing the life chances of 35,000 disadvantaged young Londoners. We do that through our food and wellbeing programme, Kitchen Social, Our numeracy programme, Count on Us, our employment programmes, Access Aspiration, which is for 16 to 18-year-olds, and Creativity Works, employment programme for 18 to 24-year-olds. I'm here today to talk mostly about Kitchen Social, food programme. We went into emergency mode at the end of March. We work with over 93 community centres across London in 23 out of 33 boroughs. So our job has been extremely hard, like everyone else's. We had to raise additional funds to support young people and their families throughout the holiday period and lockdown. Our Kitchen Social is normally a holiday activity and food programme, but we had to work during the lockdown period to make sure families weren't going hungry. So we've to date, from March to September, been able, with the help of our partners, been able to supply 250,000 meals to young people and their families across London.
Thank you, Louise. And Jo, can I ask you to complete the roundup, please?
Thank you. My name is Jo Bridger. I'm the procurement coordinator at Women's Aid. So Women's Aid Federation, there are 4 across the country, but I work for Women's Aid Federation of England. We represent over 150 independent charity organisations. Some are charitable, some are housing associations, but all of them will provide some kind of specialist service to women and children who are experiencing domestic abuse. So we provide a voice for them at a political level. We collect data, we lobby, we support them in many different ways. We provide a quality standard, and we also provide direct services. So over the pandemic, we really ramped up our online chat service, and we've seen an increase, 40% at the very beginning of the pandemic, of women seeking silent advice that they could access online. So my team is the membership team, and my role has been about providing those goods and services under the pandemic, especially. So we've seen an influx in donations, but also our team has been responsible for making sure that the donations that the sector is receiving are done in a fair and equitable way, and to the services that are really providing a great service and quality standard to the women and children that need them.
Okay, thank you very much, Jo. I'm really struck, actually, just at this point with the synergies that we're all sort of experiencing, and the level of reach that, if the combined impact, is phenomenal, and the social capital that I guess that's been harnessed as a result of this pandemic. The volume of goods that have actually increased tenfold, the volume of services, the volume of money that we've probably all been handling by comparison to pre-COVID. And it really does open one's eyes to the power of what can be done when we need to. And I suppose that really lays the groundwork for my first question, which I'm going to sort of pose and then offer out for a response. But many of us want to harness the compassion and kindness that COVID-19 has unleashed and start that bigger conversation. What kind of future do we want to collectively create post-pandemic? You know, we know, don't we, that we've seen communities form. We've seen people reaching out, we've seen neighbourhoods coming together. How has COVID-19 impacted the way your organisation is tackling the issues that it faces? And how are you raising awareness that there were so many of us who were struggling without a safety net before, and now it is likely that those numbers will increase significantly? You've all said in one way or the other that, you know, the demand is there, and it is likely that we will see, with the probably what is predicted as the biggest economic challenge since the Second World War hit. How are you going to deal with that? So would anybody like to go first, or would you like me to just pick? Okay. Why don't I go to Charlotte first then? And
yeah, so I think just tapping in onto those words like compassion and kindness, I think we've been, I mean, almost overwhelmed by the positive response from manufacturers and retailers, people who were looking to do something during the crisis, particularly those manufacturing products like toilet roll and hand wash, which have been so desperately needed. So what we've seen is a real stepping up from the companies we work with. On certain months throughout the crisis, we had almost 10 times as much in donated product coming to us as we would outside of the crisis period. So what we're really working on now is embedding that response. We want to be able to respond to our network like we're in a crisis without needing a crisis to do it.
Right.
And we know that that long-term need, as I said, isn't going anywhere. The other thing we've really seen is we've had some really wonderful experiences working with particular brands. So working with people like Huggies and Carex, who have launched buy one, donate one schemes with us, which has really demonstrated and picked up on that for those that can afford the essentials, they're really looking for something to do during the crisis to be able to give back and demonstrate that kindness. So with Huggies, we had nappies, pull-ups and wipes, where if you purchased from their online shop, an equivalent pack was donated to us to get out to a community, to a family that couldn't afford to access them directly. And so we've really seen success with those sorts of brand-led campaigns, which we're really keen to continue. And as I say, just reflects that kindness that people want to find an outlet to demonstrate. But for us, ultimately, it's the sharing stories that's key. We're so fortunate to speak every day to thousands of charities who are out there in local communities, who know what the need is and who are seeing the impact that things that we wouldn't think twice about, like a tube of toothpaste or a shower gel, has for a family, or has for someone who's always going for the cheapest of everything to be given a luxury brand of something, the difference that makes. So it's on us to be sharing those stories, to tell those stories from those that can't tell them themselves, and to really get that kind of groundswell and that conversation going.
Okay. Thank you, Charlotte. Perhaps James, I could ask you to come in next.
Yeah, thank you, Elaine. So I think, it has been remarkable to see and observe the number of people, individuals that have been willing to support others during COVID. And I think, the government ran that amazing volunteer recruitment campaign that had 750,000 volunteers sign up within 3 days. Certainly FareShare has an enormous bank of volunteers ready, willing and waiting for us to seek their support when we need it, more than we need actually at the moment. So that's been great. And allied to the individual desire to help, there's been a great desire to support us from the food industry as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, it's interesting because there was always a sort of moral and an environmental imperative to do good with surplus food rather than have it go to waste anyway. And I think what the crisis did was just create these conditions where there's no excuse now to do anything else with it other than put it to good causes. And it has been an extraordinary time that I think we're all still kind of processing. What are some of the good things that have come out of a horrendous time for many people? Certainly the desire to support others less fortunate than yourself, but an individual and a corporate level. And for me, it's sort of how best to harness that, how to do it in a coordinated and structured way, how to not have it fragmented across hundreds of different organizations doing broadly similar things. The power of procuring with economies of scale at a national level, but then delivering that through hyper-local organizations, people who have expertise in their own particular areas, trying to sort of coordinate some of that so that it's an efficient framework through which good can be done. That's what I would like to see coming out of this disaster, I think.
So that sort of think big but deliver local.
Absolutely, and think big and act big where acting at scale helps bring efficiencies. But delivering locally where the person power is and the expertise is on the ground.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, James. Louise and then Joe, perhaps, or would you like to go the other way round this time? Yeah, Louise, happy, okay.
That's fine. I sort of echo what Charlotte and James have said. Actually, we found a lot more people came forward to us. I think also worryingly, although I hope this situation's changed now, it's actually there was quite a proportion of population who just simply had no idea how bad the situation was, particularly in food poverty before the pandemic struck. And I think now there is a huge, I mean, I'm hoping awareness is almost every person in the UK now knows that there's been a serious long-term issue, and it has only become greater, and that we are all in this together and we need to help. So I'd say the Marcus Rashford campaign has been a brilliant example of how a public persona can harness the collaboration that's all just been waiting in the wings and actually bring a huge movement, which I hope will afford change before long. I really do. We found that, as like with Charlotte, many corporates have actually come and approached us and said, what can we do to help? So we've had many restaurant partners who had to close down in the pandemic, but who said, look, we want to volunteer. We'll give you all our surplus food. Where can we direct it? What can we do when we open again? So, for example, we're working with Caravan Restaurants at the moment in London, and they have very kindly, even though they've just opened and they had Eat Out to Help Out going on, they put an incentive on the bill, an initiative, so that you could potentially donate £1 with your bill at the end of your meal. We've collaborated with many third parties, for example, school food caterers, Thomas Frank, who have their own foundation. They came to us and said, look, what can we do to help? We can see that you need to supply meals. And they used the kitchens of some of the schools that they were working with, like the GDST, the Girls' Day School Trust, had 2 of their schools open during the summer holidays so that Thomas Frank could create meals and deliver them to our community hubs and our kitchen social network. Dulwich Prep down in South London did the same throughout the term time. So we've been blown away by the amount of support, and then we launched an emergency funding appeal literally as soon as lockdown started, and the response to that has been incredible. We are so grateful to all the supporters, from someone who might donate £5 to some of the big trusts and foundations who've given us a lot more than that, but we just couldn't have done it without everybody else. And like James said, and Charlotte, it's like now we need to harness the goodwill that has grown and nurture it. And we hope very much we'll continue to work with all the corporate partners that have come to us during the pandemic.
And I think, what I'm hearing from those of you who've spoken so far is a real sense of a social conscience that has sort of come to the fore, and you haven't had to prick that consciousness. It's come there proactively, which is really encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah.
Jo, would you like to come in and give us your perspective?
Thank you. So, thinking about what kind of society and community we want when we emerge from this situation, for me, I think, first of all, is that women are believed and that male violence is not acceptable. What was very interesting in the months before COVID was a thing in England is we could see that in China, in Italy, in Spain, organisations were reporting that there were increases in domestic violence in those countries. So we can say that domestic violence isn't in one culture or in one type of society or in one type of economic, social demographic. I think it's really important to say that the pandemic doesn't cause domestic violence, but it can be used as a tool by perpetrators. So the experiences that women and children were facing before the pandemic are still here. They're going to be there after the pandemic when people are able to go back to work. But the things around the virus itself and around lockdown can exacerbate and can be used as a tool. So when we emerge from and into a kind of a new way of being, I think that people need to understand that, yes, financial abuse is definitely a part of definitely a part of domestic violence, domestic abuse, but anybody can experience it. And actually what's really important is that the response to somebody that is talking about their experiences of their relationship, that woman needs to be responded to with dignity, and she needs to have autonomy, because actually a lot of domestic violence is about control and about taking away of power. So we have a program called Ask Me, which is a community ambassador program. And within that, we talk to community groups, to businesses about how to support people that are experiencing domestic violence, because unfortunately, a charitable response actually can be quite disempowering.
Right.
We aim in all our work to be survivor focused and to be trauma informed, and listen to what our survivors of domestic abuse have told us, so that our responses and the responses of our member services, the refuges that we represent and support, put that woman in the centre and she can make her own decisions. I think it's also worth saying that with the return to work, outside of our homes, excuse me, and in offices, it's really worth thinking about how organisations who have seen it as a problem out there now might realise that actually within their organisations there are people that are experiencing domestic abuse and people that are perpetrating domestic abuse. So what is the response from the economy and from the working world that we've kind of had a break from? But how are those organisations who might want to donate products, they might want to be supportive in a kind of philanthropic way, but actually what is their response as an employer? What's their responsibility to the women and to the men and the children that are within their kind of community, as it were, within their employment?
Okay, thank you. That's a very thought-provoking matter, actually, because I think you're absolutely right. We tend to think of things being over there and not necessarily within as employers. And I'm sure many of us have met colleagues who've been going through their own private challenge through this period, whether it be financial, whether it be abuse. And it is probably a learning thing for employment factors in the future, isn't it? Thank you. And you know, again, I'm struck by dignity through this. Dignity is really important. Some of you talked about giving people the empowerment and the skills to be able to make their own choices. And I think there are some of those things that we just take for granted in day-to-day living. I wanted to come into something more specific now and talk to James about something that your CEO, Lindsay Boswell, has recently said. James, in the midst of this period of turmoil, we believe Britain desperately needs a national food strategy. Henry Dimbleby has spent time listening to and consulting with people across the length and breadth of the country, from food businesses to charities, to people from all backgrounds and walks of life. And we hope the government will push ahead installing a national food strategy, the first we've seen since the Second World War. Why is Fair Share supporting a national food strategy to help combat poverty? And what solutions could we use when thinking about some of the solutions that you learn when we are thinking about how we address hygiene poverty?
Thanks, Elaine. Yeah, I'll just check how long I've got, if I may, because I could go on all day and all night.
Yeah, well,
10 minutes?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Okay, fab.
Important. I think it's such an important topic that, you know, we give you the floor, James.
Thank you. So, yeah, the National Food Strategy, it's a mandate to look at the whole food system from farm to fork and hopefully disposal, although we will wait to see if measures to combat food waste will be included. To observe and to listen and to understand where the problems are and where the opportunities are to improve the food system, and to make sort of realistic and achievable kind of costed recommendations to deliver these improvements. So it's kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to improve the nation's food system and the way it thinks about food, the way it thinks about health and nutrition, and sort of positive life pathways resulting from good food for decades to come. So we massively welcome it from that perspective. There's three kind of contextual points that I wanted to cover. So the market is failing in certain areas. You know, it's not working when you've got 8 million people facing food insecurity in the UK, and yet millions of tons of food that's perfectly good to eat goes to waste too. you know, over 1.4 billion meals a year equivalent of good food is wasted. You've got some food businesses making hundreds of millions, if not billions of pounds of profit annually. Yet you've got many, many thousands that have been ordered to shut and are rapidly going out of business. And you've got the costs of malnutrition to the NHS are greater than that of both obesity and smoking. So I think the cost of malnutrition has been costed out at 19.6 billion a year. That of obesity is 9.7 billion a year, and that of smoking 2.6 billion a year. So there is just this enormous opportunity to look at malnutrition as an issue amongst the communities of the UK. I'm really trying to address that through this food strategy, with a benefit to all of us as taxpayers and as society. The second sort of area of context is around the support areas that the food industry needs. So the food and drink industry is the UK's largest manufacturing sector. It contributes over £28 billion a year to the economy annually, employs 400,000 people. And the manufacturing industry is a subsection of the total sort of £110 billion farm to fork food chain in the UK. So it's this enormous cog in the machinery of the UK, and it's, you know, food is just a vital thing in our lives. Not only does it provide the health and nutrition benefits that it does, but it brings social cohesion, it brings resilience, it brings communities and families and friends together. It's of vital cultural importance that we get it right. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, as I'm sure we've all learned at university, you know, it's there as a fundamental pillar of life. My belief is the UK food industry can be an enormous force for good. It's proven that throughout lockdown and some of the food partners that FareShare was working with beforehand, because so many positive life pathways result from access to healthy, cost-effective food. I mean, it's quite simple, really. The final contextual point is a challenge even greater than COVID, the environmental challenge, the climate change challenge, the greatest challenge that we all face in our lifetimes, in our children's lifetimes, and probably their children's lifetimes. What sort of world do we want them to inherit from us? Is it one where food production remains the source of a quarter of all the carbon emissions on the planet? No. What we need are innovations and policies that help us move to as low a carbon food system as possible, that contains all the important food groups, but that's produced in a way, and, you know, waste to an extent is inevitable, but make sure it's wasted in a way that's as low impact as possible. Mm-hmm. At the moment, across the globe, 30% of all the food that's grown is wasted. That contributes to 8% of global carbon emissions, and it's absolute madness. And only policy levers will stop it. The most environmentally friendly way of using that food that's wasted is to get it to people for its intended purpose, to be eaten. And finally, on the hygiene poverty side, I think lessons can be learned and applied from the food industry. You know, the negative outcomes of lower level of hygienes could be costed up in terms of cost to the NHS, in terms of cost to the taxpayer, if that hasn't been done already. Understand and research the barriers to better hygiene really clearly, and then sort of formulate achievable and realistic policies and incentives that could be put in place to overcome those barriers. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe that's something that the Hygiene Bank could collaborate on with some of the partners on this panel.
Yeah, no, I think that's very relevant. I mean, we're sort of behind you in terms of our evolution, but I think some of the things that you've said there, if we start to look at that information that's available and track the data and the evidence, you know, and sort of leapfrog into that space that says, how do we piggyback off some of this work? Because whilst hygiene isn't referenced in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I do believe it's as important for people's well-being and a sense of dignity. Again, you know, we come back to that word that gives people the ability then to do things with their life that otherwise they may not be able to. And thank you, James, very, very informative, and really some really interesting statistics there. Thank you. I'd like to move to Charlotte now, and since lockdown, since the UK lockdown, In-Kind Direct has supported, as you said, over 2,500 charity partners, and some phenomenal statistics, Charlotte. In preparing for today, I was looking at some of the things that you've achieved, which is absolutely fantastic. 228,000 laundry cleaning products, 180,000 bottles of hand wash, 930,000 toilet rolls, 220,000 nappies, and the list goes on. It is absolutely phenomenal. How has the pandemic shone a light on the hidden crisis that so many of us are living with in the UK, who simply can't afford those basic hygiene essentials we need to keep clean and to keep safe? Charlotte, in your view?
Yeah. Thanks, Elaine. Yeah, and really, I guess starting point is to pick up on a point I think Louise made in a previous question, was it absolutely is a hidden issue, because it's not that it started with the crisis or it suddenly happened. I think just a lot more people are aware of it now, and I think certainly from the conversations we've had and sort of research we've conducted with our network, the crisis hasn't been a leveller. It has disproportionately affected those that were already struggling, and it's pushed a lot of families who were just about getting by to the financial brink. And I think there's been, through the fantastic work of Fair Share and others, a real groundswell awareness of food poverty. But I think exactly as you've touched on, Elaine, we're aware that long before people start going to a food bank, or as they're going to a food bank, they're not brushing their teeth, they're not washing their clothes, they're not able to get a clean shower. You've got children going to school without a clean school uniform, parents going to work without deodorant, no one can afford a new pair of shoes. So these things go hand in hand, and I think what we've seen is looking at any one type of poverty in isolation is a bit of a non-starter, that if someone's struggling, then they're struggling, and it's probably not just in one area. And picking up on James's earlier point, that coordinated effort becomes essential if we're actually going to positively impact a person's life. So as I mentioned, for In-Kind Direct, keeping clean, safe and well has always been kind of a core piece of what we do. And during the crisis, our highest demand products from our network. So we have a big online kind of e-commerce site effectively, where charities in our network can register with us and they access a whole range of products. So we try and keep that range as broad as possible, and it ranges, as I say, from toiletries, nappies, period products, through to then the office supplies, clothing, toys and other things that families and the charity supporting them might need to be able to do what they're doing. And what we've seen is hand wash, toilet rolls, period products, nappies, those basic cleaning supplies are what have been most needed. And when we spoke to our network and said, look, where do you see the need going the rest of this year? It's staying in that area, that fundamental of keeping people clean, safe and well is going to be there. And everything else, what we're also seeing is things like learning supplies, tech and toys to get people back to feeling a bit more normal. They're all going to be essential as well. So as I say, it's not one without the other. I think what we also saw, which was perhaps surprising, was during that initial period of the crisis, when we heard phrases like stockpiling and you could go to a supermarket and the shelves would be empty, it really did start to give people a taste of what it might be like to go without. People who'd never experienced that before could suddenly see what it might be like to have to go a week without washing powder, or knowing that last toilet roll's got to last you as long as possible because you don't know where the next lot's coming from. And I think that gave people a sense of what some of those fundamentals we do just all take for granted, what not having those might be like. I think what we also saw is Fortunately, about 3/4 of our network were able to pivot and either provide online services or different kinds of service to their normal face-to-face services when we went into lockdown at the end of March. But the loss of those community spaces, the loss of places of worship being open and available 24 hours a day, the loss of schools being a safe place for children to go to, really kind of highlighted how reliant a lot of communities are on charitable support to complement government support as well. And I think that safety net, that disappearing of that safety net, even for a limited period of time, really brought into sharp focus how many people are affected, that it's not just this very small percentage at the end of a community who might be struggling. It's actually an awful lot of people. And then the figures that James said, you said 8 million in food poverty. I mean, that's going to extend to other kinds of poverty as well. And certainly we saw a lot of schools who weren't offering lessons pivoting to become food banks during the crisis. We saw a lot of food banks extending their range to offer a whole range of hygiene products as well, recognising that those things go hand in hand. So as I mentioned, we spoke to our network, we did a kind of a formal survey across July. We'll be publishing some of those findings towards the end of September, but we were able to speak to about 650 of our network and really get a sense of what they've been doing in the crisis and what they're going to need for the rest of the year. And what we saw is that many of them were supporting twice as many families as before the crisis. So that demand has just skyrocketed, and over half of them are doing that with less income than before. Yeah. So it's that double whammy on the charity sector in particular, of demand going up but income going down. And what we're also seeing is that trying to calculate the reliance on support from our charity partners, that reliance is going up. So when things like the furlough scheme come to the end, when unemployment potentially starts to increase again, that need for our local networks of charities to be there on the ground delivering the support that's needed, whether that's with products or with advice or with support or somewhere safe to go, that's going to be even more important as the year goes on. And I think really the last thing I'd just like to touch on from In-Kind Direct's perspective is, as I said, we take a very broad definition. We talk about providing life's essentials. Similarly, we work a lot with surplus product across the manufacturing and retail sector. So it's very much about, you've got a usable product. We don't want to see it go to waste. We want to get it into the hands of someone who needs it, who otherwise couldn't afford it. But we take that really broad view of what's a life essential. And with hygiene products, that's particularly pertinent. Mm-hmm. And we work with some fantastic brands who we might class as luxury brands. And you do sometimes get that question of, well, if you're struggling, surely anything, why has it got to be a big brand? Why has it got to be a well-known name? Mm-hmm. And what we see is that double whammy, and as a phenomenal quote from a charity we work with, the Black and Blue charitable company who also work in the domestic violence sector. And they say you've got a lady arriving who would normally have to get by with the cheapest of everything, or go without entirely, being handed a known brand and a whole pack of something that is just for them. The dignity, the self-esteem, the value that has goes far beyond the retail price of that product. Mm-hmm. And similarly, we heard from an Essex charity. They had a family of 4 who were living in their car. They were able to get them set up in a new home, and that first night the kids all got a lovely bubble bath, luxury smellies, and just where the mum was in tears. And that's that they're over the moon to have that little bit of luxury for what we would class as kind of just a taken for granted product.
Yeah. And a very basic need, as you said. I think you've touched on something, Charlotte, that I think probably we can all relate to, and that's not to look at just one type of poverty, because life doesn't really work like that, does it? We don't compartmentalize poverty into a specific thing. It is a generic issue. And I'm also struck by, the which we'll all be facing, that increased demand, whilst we've also got to learn to run our own organisations in the most cost-effective and efficient way possible, because of funding streams will need to be greater, but there's also potentially more risk for that funding to come into charity. So never a more important time for that third sector voice. Really, really key, I think. Thank you, Charlotte. I'm going to move on to Louise, because I think we had a great opportunity to partner with the Mayor's Fund for London by donating 7,000 period products in the summer of food and fun. which was a programme in Lambeth and Southwark, and we donated half of those products, and our brand partner Hey Girls matched it. Why is collaboration a key part of the Mayor's Fund for London, Louise? And perhaps, you know, what are your key messages that you would like to deliver to us all?
First of all, I just want to say on this forum, thank you for what you did for us this summer, because what you guys really went above and beyond, and we were really overwhelmed, as were the centres that we were working with in Lambeth and Southwark. I mean, the feedback we got was phenomenal. We got photos sent, people in tears, just so grateful. And as Charlotte said, it's, you know, a family who has been struggling, buying the cheapest brand or going without, to suddenly get a really nice brand of a product which they would never normally expect. It kind of gives them their dignity back. So we were so grateful to you at the Hygiene Bank for doing that. I'm going to go back to that quote by John Donne. No man is an island, and you know, we are not islands. We've all got to work together, and that's something that we found particularly in lockdown, is how collaboration really was a key part of what we did on a day-to-day basis, particularly with our kitchen social food and activity programme. We worked with a number of third parties to maximise value to the families and communities that we were supporting. You know, we got our heads together and we thought, right, who can we go and ask? Let's not be afraid to ask. Let's go out there. And there's so much goodwill out there. Who can we ask? So we approached people, and we also had people coming to us. But the National Literacy Trust, for example, we worked with them and their publisher, HarperCollins. They donated 9,000 children's books to the Mayor's Fund this summer, which we managed to deliver with the help of volunteers. Again, another key, we couldn't do this without volunteers, who we were donated a van by Renault, which enabled us to deliver all around London over summer. We were also given 2,500 arts and crafts packs with money from the Arts Council. So the families were absolutely overjoyed. The children had never had anything like this apart from occasionally at school. And what we did use to distribute these, we went to some centres, but we also went via some of the schools that were open and who were acting as food banks as well, and got them to distribute. And I actually went and visited one of them with one of our ambassadors, Dizzy Rascal. It was actually in his old neighbourhood of Tower Hamlets, and he said, "Oh, it's just so great to be back around here." But he was really touched, but also emotionally, I think he found it quite moving, the amount of people that were queuing around the block to pick up these products. And was just so grateful and thankful, and I just felt, God, I just wish there was more we could do. We worked with Zipcar. They were incredible as well. They came to us and said, what can we do to help? And we said, well, we're working with 28 community centres that haven't open across London at the moment, but they need transport, because we've got to get these meals out to people. Because what would normally happen in the kitchen social food programme is that children would come to us during holidays, but in lockdown they couldn't travel, they couldn't leave their homes or pop them once a day. So we had an army of volunteers at each community centre who came in and voluntarily gave up their time to pack up meals and take them out door to door. And we couldn't do it without them, because they've got local knowledge that we just don't have. And they knew who the people were that would need this the most. And then word spread, and other people were recommended to those local centres. So I visited another of our centres in Haringey in July, and I found that there was a huge list tripled since the beginning of lockdown, because more and more people have been recommended and heard about the free meals scheme. So yes, it's part of what we do going forward. Now we need to collaborate with other people. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, so let's go to other organisations that will complement what we do at the Mayor's Fund and work with them, rather than trying to start up our own initiative. Let's work with you guys and harness your connections, and hopefully we can reciprocate. We work with a chartered trust as well, who've been incredibly generous. Their focus is supporting children living in poverty in London, and they ran a matching campaign this summer, Champions for Children, via the Big Give Forum, and they match our donors, and then we go out onto the Big Give Forum and it attracts a similar amount back in public donation. So it's about networking, harnessing the goodwill and community spirit, and just, as I said, never be afraid to ask.
Thank you, Louise. Yeah, absolutely fascinating. And I think that word again comes up, doesn't it? The collaboration, and how much more powerful we are together than the sum of the single parts is amazing. Jo, I'm going to bring you in now, and you know, perhaps a topic that's a very difficult topic for us all to actually get our minds around if we have no experience of just exactly what domestic abuse does to people and how it impacts. And we know perpetrators of abuse use multiple methods of control on their partners, such as preventing them from seeking medical attention or reaching out to support networks, controlling via financial means. Can you tell us about some of the research that Women's Aid has conducted on the impact of COVID-19 and how that's impacted on women who are experiencing domestic abuse and the economic implications? Thank you.
Our research and evaluation team have been very busy the past 6 months, and we've just released a report called The Perfect Storm that came out last month, and that's the document I'm going to be, speaking from.
Yes.
I'm also going to quote some research from IMCAN, which is our sister organisation. They're a specialist organisation that represents services that support Black and minoritized women across the country. And they, we have to really think about how, if you experience racism from society, from a partner, from services, then your experience of domestic abuse is going to be very different than if you're a white woman who's experiencing domestic abuse. So thinking particularly about Windrush women, thinking about women that have no recourse to public funds, thinking about the general racism that's come from the idea that it was a Chinese virus, thinking about general rising xenophobia and the hostile environment. The women that seek those services have a particular experience. So I want to mention some things in the research that IMCAN did to particularly address that. I really appreciated what you said about the different ways that perpetrators can use the virus. And I think it's very interesting to think specifically how hygiene and domestic abuse intersect with each other. So, you talked about financial means, refusing access to money, that's refusing access to period products, to medicines, things that are going to keep you clean, just the coercive control about what you're allowed to use, breaking makeup, breaking, your products, and also the sexual and physical aspect of it. If you're not able to keep your body clean, and then infections can spread. So there's myriad ways that anyway hygiene can impact your experience if it's part of the perpetrator's use. So I want to take from our Perfect Storm and a Perfect Storm report, and this was done by surveying survivors and surveying our services. And we found that 91% of women that we spoke to, their experience of abuse had been impacted by the virus, and 2/3 had the virus and the pandemic as a tool of that abuse. And then that's in two ways. So the first way would be the virus itself, and in the second way it would be the lockdown or the restrictions were part of that abuse. So we found that those women told us that 37% their partner refused to wash their hands. They refused to, follow the guidelines that would keep them safe. 7% found that people were invited into the home. And for me, this is the thing that really kind of made me feel quite horrible after the death of Bele Majunga, the transport worker, was that 5% of women had been threatened to be spat or coughed at, and 5% of women had actually been coughed and spat at as part of that abuse. And that, that's that it should be a crime. It is a crime of domestic abuse, but that kind of violence that we see, that threat of violence in spitting, using the virus, as an actual real tool. And similarly, 50% of women said that they really were afraid that their child would experience domestic and child abuse if they got sick or if they were put in hospital and their child was then alone with that perpetrator. And that's a very sobering thing that, you know, it's not necessarily your first port of call, but I don't want to say it's something to celebrate, but it is a milestone that the Domestic Abuse Bill now recognises that children are victims of domestic abuse if they see it. But this point of the 50% of women being scared, that really highlights that children in that home, you know, aren't just bystanders, they're actually going to be experiencing that too. Same way thinking about lockdown, 78% of women said it was harder to leave.
Right.
And that's for, you know, that's for many reasons. That's for, you know, physically you can't get anywhere. You might not have any money. But 10%, the highlight again for hygiene is that harder to leave, just to go out and buy the stuff you need. So lots of the restrictions on movement impacted women in the kind of like, oh, I need to leave this relationship, down to I need to get the support I need from somebody else or to buy a product that's going to help me with this immediate thing that I'm experiencing. And I think a thing to think about is how lots of people quickly digitized. We enjoyed culture online in ways that are accessible that disabled women haven't experienced for ages, or disabled anybody hasn't been able to enjoy. But then lots of services are inaccessible if you don't have digital access, either because you can't afford it, because you don't speak that language that digital service is in, or if your phone is being monitored, you know, or you're not allowed to have a phone, or your internet is being monitored. So in terms of accessing support, also accessing, you know, just the enjoyment of control over your own life and how you use the internet was definitely restricted if those women had access to the internet. I think another thing, kind of the last part I want to talk about, is the impact of Corona on the services that we support. And yes, there were grants that came in from government, from many funders, but less than half of our members said that that amount of money actually met the need that they had. And there's, I mean, the figures are pretty large. We estimate that the annual need for provision for domestic abuse is 393 million. And what was given at the beginning of the pandemic was 65 million. So that clearly doesn't meet the need generally. IMCON did a really interesting piece of work, and I'm really pleased that they were able to publish their report before us. That came out in May, and their report is called The Dual Pandemic, and it looks at how their members, who are specialist services for Black and minoritized women, how they worked, you know, at that beginning of lockdown. And 75% of their members were thinking and working on the access to benefits. 50% were supporting women who had had a loss of employment as well as experiencing domestic abuse, and 50% had of services were working with women who were experiencing domestic abuse and had some impact of loss of income because of the lockdown. And I think it's really important to think about so many of those frontline workers were women who were already racialized in society, or Black women, Asian women. So they have a very specific experience at the beginning of lockdown. We know that nurses, doctors, the first people to die from COVID were, you know, Black people and Asian people. There's a different level of risk for different people in our society because of how some services, some experiences, some parts of society are racist or ableist. So we have to think about it, not just, like we said earlier, that COVID is just this blanket leveler, because unfortunately it hasn't been. In terms of refuge spaces, only 5% of refuge spaces in the country, 5.8 refuge spaces, are available for women that have no recourse to public funds. So those women who are very scared of COVID and scared that their perpetrator will use their immigration status against them, they are particularly vulnerable. So IMCON really highlighted that in their report. And I think those people are going to be the people that we need to make sure that we keep an eye on, that we are focusing on when we think about who needs what provision going forward. And the domestic abuse bill has addressed some of that, but unfortunately it hasn't provided those safeguards for migrant women. And that level of funding that we need hasn't been provided by the influx. So addressing those two things is really key.
Thank you, Jo. Some very sobering facts in the information that you've just given us all, and clearly a very big challenge when you look at the funding gap and the prevalence and the hidden nature of what you're dealing with. I'm very conscious that today we have had some, you know, insight into some of the really fantastic work that is going on, and although we could probably talk for the rest of the day as a group of people, I'm sure I do need to start to bring matters to a close. But I'm struck by the importance of the collaboration agenda. Actually, it's so significant, it's so key, not only in how we deliver services, but also in how we start to deliver change, to get that agenda up there, to get it in the eyes of people. And perhaps, you know, although we don't like to think of the pandemic as anything other than something that's been really difficult for us to deal with, perhaps it does present an opportunity for us to work together. And I'm hoping that at Hygiene Bank we can continue to work with you and look forward to taking some of those conversations forward. I just wanted to close really by giving you each an opportunity to sort of perhaps leave a closing remark or a key message that you wanted to get out. And I would like to reiterate, thank you so much for your time today. It's been invaluable, and I hope we can continue to work together. So James, I'll just bring you in to sort of give us a view from your perspective.
Thank you. So my closing remark would be that the job is really just beginning. The recession is going to put a lot more pressure on the voluntary sector to provide care and support services, and we need government and corporate support, as well as all the individual volunteers that we rely on to help deliver the services that we provide to more people. That would be it. We need more help than ever before.
Yeah, I would echo that, definitely. Charlotte, would you like to come in?
Yes, absolutely, echoing what Louise and James have just said. I think, for us, it's absolutely about embedding that goodwill and that crisis response into something that's more sustainable, something that's longer term. As the companies that we work with are building back themselves, how do we build things like product giving, like charitable support into their long-term recovery plans? How do we build more the goodwill between all of our organisations in working closely together and maintaining that spirit of collaboration? And ultimately, it is about, the need is not going anywhere. If anything, it's going to grow. So everyone who's done something already needs to keep doing more. And really, it's on us and organisations like ours to make that as easy as possible, to present the facts, to tell the stories, and to make it as easy to get involved in and help us in what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you. Louise?
Yeah, again, I'd echo what the other two have said. We just need to keep this conversation going. We need to keep talking, we need to keep sharing our case studies, working with each other, strengthening and supporting the families and the communities that we're already supporting, expanding our networks, promoting diversity. I mean, ultimately, I'd love a world where there wasn't actually no need for kitchen social, but I fear, sadly, that this is a very long way away, far away on the horizon. So for now, we've just got to keep working, keep lobbying the government, and keep working together.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. Thank you very much. And Jo, finally.
Thank you. I think what Louise said about wishing that kitchen social didn't exist, that's how I feel. we're a rich country, and the country is going to go through economic changes. So we need leadership and political decision making that will make the economy work for everybody, not just a few people.
Thank you. Yeah, some very, very powerful messages from you all. So we're going to close now. Thank you so much for your time, for your input, for your insightful thoughts, because certainly some of the things that you've drawn out today will make a difference for society, and I think as we learn how to grapple with what we're facing, that working together will be absolutely key. For anybody watching today, we will be signposting to all of our partners on the meeting today, on the discussion panel today, and the links will be not only on the National Hygiene Week website, but also on the Hygiene Bank website, so people can find out more about each of the organisations. But I'll close now and say thank you to my colleagues on here, and fantastic discussion. Thank you.